A spokesman for former House Speaker Newt Gingrich says the Republican is going to formally announce his bid this Wednesday. Does he stand a chance against Ron Paul? One of my colleagues, Juan Williams, wrote a column today saying he thinks Congressman Paul, who's already run for president twice, is the man to beat in the current Republican race. My next guest has her own opinion. Fox News political analyst and New York Post columnist and my good friend Kristen Powers joins me now. Kristen, welcome here. Were you as surprised as I when you saw Juan Williams' column this morning in which he says Ron Paul is the most intellectually honest, most consistent in his views, and shockingly is now leading in the polls and in money raising? Well,
no, I wasn't surprised, and there is a CNN poll where Ron Paul actually looks like the man to beat because he's the one who comes the closest to beating Barack Obama within about 7 points, which is pretty incredible. I wasn't surprised at what Juan wrote because I felt the same way. I feel the same way about Ron Paul, and you know, when I was watching the debate, I also felt like, why don't the Republicans want to vote for this guy? You know, he's great. But that's kind of the problem for Ron Paul, I think.
All right. Does he represent a vision of the Republican Party closer to Barry Goldwater than either of the George Bushes? Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair.
Go ahead.
Well, and I just think the fact that he can appeal to people like me or to people like Juan, and I don't think either of us are saying we would vote for him, but that we find him appealing sort of explains why he would have a problem with the conservative base in the Republican Party.
All right. You are a Democrat. You are a moderate Democrat. You worked in the Clinton administration. How does Ron Paul appeal to you? You know how he appeals to me and to many of us watching, but how does he appeal to you, Kristen?
Well, I think his foreign policy views are obviously very in line with where a lot of liberals are, where a lot of Democrats are. But what's appealing about him overall is that he is intellectually honest and that he obviously has a lot of integrity. He says things that are unpopular quite often. He's been called crazy. It doesn't matter. He never backs down, you know, and he has stayed the course on what he believes. And now suddenly people are coming around, even some Republicans, and saying, you know what, you're right, we shouldn't have invaded Iraq.
Yes, a lot of Republicans are saying we shouldn't have invaded Iraq. A lot of Republicans are saying we should come home. Are Republicans saying now that bin Laden is dead at a cost of who knows what? I'm not talking about the 40-person attack team last week. That was about as surgical as could be. I'm talking about the billions and maybe trillion that was spent in the 10 years preceding it. But are Republicans in D.C. saying now that bin Laden is dead, we don't belong in Afghanistan because that's unwinnable and we achieved our goal?
I think the Republican Party is split on that issue. You've seen different people come out and say, what are we doing there? A lot of the leading conservative thinkers have said, what are we doing there? It's time to get out. Now, I don't know if some of it is a little bit because it's now Obama's war and they don't care as much about it, or if they, you know, I think some people legitimately think that we're losing and then we're not going to win and it's not worth the money. But I don't think that that's going to be what this election's about. This election's going to be about the economy.
I agree with you.
You know, I mean, the election, and I think when we start getting into some of Ron Paul's positions, I think that probably a lot of them will line up with where a lot of people are, and some of them I think people will say are sort of wacky.
All right, Ron Paul's been in the Congress for nearly 25 years, and in those 25 years he has steadfastly and consistently made these arguments about the gold standard, about sound money, about the problems with the Fed. Question, has he succeeded in moving those arguments, which were once considered loony, now into the mainstream to the point where they are openly discussed at a Republican presidential debate?
I think that they're discussed, but I still think they fall in the loony category. I still think the mainstream media is going to... Look, if he really starts to take off and people really start paying attention to him seriously, I think that he will be portrayed as the crazy uncle, which is what they try to do with him. It's despicable, but that's how he gets treated. You know, and I think that even though he knows more substantively about these issues than probably everyone else on that stage combined, he still gets sort of treated like he's nutty.
How about the other libertarian that was on the stage the other night, Governor Johnson, who's going to be here in a few minutes, as will one of the other fellows from that night, Senator Santorum. Let's talk about Governor Johnson. What is his standing with the base of the Republican Party, even with the Barry Goldwater, Ronald Reagan wing of the Republican Party?
Well, look, he's pro-choice. So
is that a killer in Republican primaries?
I think it is a killer in the Republican primary. Now, because the economy is such a big issue, maybe he could get around it. I think it's very unlikely. He's another one. I'll tell you, my Democratic friends who watched the debate were saying, I like that Gary Johnson guy. Again, I really feel like if Democrats are saying that probably doesn't bode well for a Republican primary. Ron Paul Paul is staunchly pro-life.
Who does President Obama least want to run against from among all those whose names have been mentioned, from Donald Trump to Ron Paul and everybody else in between?
I honestly don't think any of them keep him awake at night. Mitt Romney is probably, since he was considered the front runner, he's the most reasonable person. I think he probably could maybe appeal across party lines, although as I say it, the problem with Romney, of course, is Romney care, and so they know that they can hang that around his head. I mean, I just don't really think any of them really are much of a cause for concern. I mean, it's just it's such a weak field, and I think that and Ron Paul maybe could do better in this field than last time.
All right, Kirsten Powers, always a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us, my dear. Now that Osama